Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Will you tell us what's the core mission of Wellness and Wound?
So, I came through my own experiences. I was pregnant. I was in the last month of my pregnancy with my second child, and I
Mhm.
was told that I had low iron. And it was a discussion that my midwife and I, or my doula and I, had had frequently throughout that pregnancy and even before, trying to figure out why low iron was an issue for pregnant women. So I took iron supplements at the last month of the pregnancy. I had a hemorrhage during the birth,
Wow.
and everything was fine, but my son was born into a pool of blood. You could not see anything. The water was dark, dark.
Wow.
And my midwife was like, "Are you sure you don't want Pitocin?" I said, "No, I'm fine. I had my herbs there in case there was a hemorrhage." So that was what I used. And then when I was breastfeeding him in the postpartum period, I had no milk supply, which was not an issue for me. That was completely new for me. And I just knew that iron had a role in that. So I began to research things. I was already, I would say, holistically minded, but what I began to understand about iron's role in copper was just really quite mind-blowing, the impact that it can have. And, when we're talking about women struggling and being told that, well, some women just don't produce breast milk, I really think that that has a lot to do with iron's lack of movement. And so that is really what set me on this path. And now I work with women of all ages looking to improve iron's movement because it connects to so many different things.
This is a very common thing that we hear from a lot of women as far as going to the doctor, being put on a supplement. I talked to someone this week who I know personally, and I think I've looked at some of your stuff already, and it's more about iron dysregulation
Mhm.
rather than we don't have enough of it. Can you tell us more about that and what is the actual issue as opposed to just being low iron?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really key distinction between the two. So, like when we're looking at our blood work, and I mean, I say our blood work because it's largely where women are getting the idea that they're low in it, because we're
Mhm.
looking at things as like black or white, they're high or they're low. And that's not how iron moves in the body. It can be 10 times higher in the organs than it is in the blood. And
Mhm.
there was actually, again, my doula, she's a doctor of Chinese medicine. And one of her clients, she had told they had just had 3 iron infusions. Their ferritin went from, I want to say, like a 6 to a 12. It wasn't higher than 15. And she said to them, "You need to focus on iron's movement. So start taking beef liver and making an adrenal cocktail." She did both of those things, and her ferritin went up to above 350. And the doctor just about had a heart attack when he saw her levels. And they were like, "Well, I guess that iron infusion really worked."
Hmm.
And she was like, "No, iron is moving." So it can be stored in our tissues. One of the first places that it goes is the liver. And so that is really stressful on the liver. The liver has over 500 enzyme functions in the body. So if we're, really stressing the liver out with having to harbor all of this iron, then when we test the blood, then obviously it's not going to come back in the blood because it's being stored in the tissues. So it's kind of like a game of hide and seek with a toddler. Like the way where iron is moving right now, it's in the room, but it's just not where we're looking. And so it's kind of like that toddler hiding behind the curtain where you can see its feet and it's giggling. It's right there, but if you're not looking for it, then you're going to miss it, and it's in plain view. It's just not moving. So when we're looking at blood work and looking as things as, again, this gray, definitive black and white, high or low, we're missing the overall picture. And so when I look at blood work, I'm not just looking at one thing and saying, this is how it functions. I'm looking at where the stress is in the body. How is
Mhm.
the body handling stress? How is it handling its minerals? And when we look at things like that, it's not just, I mean, it's kind of like if you went to see a symphony and you show up and it's just the conductor. It would be like you're missing the whole rest of the experience. But if you go to that symphony and everybody else is there, then you have a better idea of what's going on. It's not just a high or a low, it's how they're all working together. And I think that's really important when we're looking at iron's movement. So we aren't deficient in iron unless somebody's had some serious trauma where there's been massive blood loss. We have iron and it's just being stored in our tissues.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So the massive blood loss, a lot of the clients that we see are women that have really heavy periods. Is there a correlation or a connection, or is that kind of the claim that they have low iron because they're like bleeding to death once a month, every month? Is that legit, or is there more behind that?
Yeah, there's more behind that. So that's not what I'm considering like a heavy blood loss. Like that
Hmm.
would be like they're in a car accident, they need like a blood infusion because they've lost the majority of their blood. Like that would be where we're having true iron deficiency. Our periods are a signal of our body as to our overall health.
Hmm.
So a lot of women don't realize that the period clotting that we have is actually a sign of the liver. So if there's clotting in our period blood, that's a sign that the liver has too much iron that's being stored in it. Same thing as the heavy blood flow. Iron is regulated through blood loss. So, where all of these women are struggling with their periods, they're really heavy, they don't feel good, they're having cramping, it's all a sign that iron isn't moving properly. Now, there was a study that was done, I can't remember the year, it was either the 1920s or the 1930s. So, give me a little break on the time frame of it. But what they did was they wanted to see what happened when they bled birds almost to the point of death. So they studied these birds, and what they found that there was a 6 times and a 3 times increase in the amount of ceruloplasmin that the body's created in order to move iron. So the body is much smarter than we think that it is. It's not out to get us. It's not trying to like bleed us to death when we're having our periods. But
Hmm.
what it is trying to do, it's trying to create a bus that moves iron, and it's trying to create it at a higher rate so that iron can move out of the tissues and into the blood. And that's why there's a heavy blood loss. It's because iron's dysregulated in the tissues. And through a heavy blood loss, the body's going to produce more ceruloplasmin, which are the buses to move iron.
That's,
Amazing.
sorry, I'm jumping back in.
Go
So
ahead.
a lot of women too, they'll see they take the birth control pill and it's like, oh, well, I can just skip the sugar pill week and then skip my period. How does that play into things down the road if they're not bleeding on a regular basis?
So even with the birth control, we're having a synthetic flow. So it's not even our true flow when we're having
True.
it. So that's an issue in itself.
Mhm.
But I think that a lot of it comes down to we are not smarter than Mother Nature. Like we cannot just take a pill and things will just go away. That's not how it's going to happen. It's going to come back and we are going to have to revisit that issue later on. So, if we are synthetically muting our body signals,
Mhm.
then one way or another, that's going to come back up and we're going to have to revisit it. So it might not be now, but it'll come back later. And the reason that we live longer than men, it's two reasons. One, because we're smarter, and two, because we have a monthly flow. So those two reasons allow for us to live longer. So I think that we are going to see, an interesting shift in what happens with women that are, aging right now because, these generations have largely, for the most part, all taken birth control and
Hmm.
reduce the amount of
Mhm.
menstrual flow that they've had, and that in itself is a huge issue. So I'm not a fan of birth control. I get that, some women feel that it's the best option. All the power to them. It's not something that I like.
Yeah. And the medication side of things, you said it's basically muting what the body's trying to do now. What
Mhm.
medication isn't
Yeah.
really?
Yeah, because I mean, if you think of, because I've heard people be like, well, herbs do the same thing. If I take a herb, for say chamomile, that's muting, maybe I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed and stuff, but herbs do not react the same way that we're talking about pharmaceutical medication. When we're talking about pharmaceutical medication, we are talking about things that are synthetic and that are imitating, I mean, really, they imitate minerals and they give us artificial hormones. Our bodies cannot produce minerals. So when we are getting herbs or whole foods, things that we have evolved with, we are getting the minerals. And so it's not the same at all. And pharmaceutical medication has been made to mimic herbs largely
Mhm.
for the most part. So, they're two completely different aspects when you're looking at one. One has an energetic component to it, and
Hmm.
another one has really I mean, it's just synthetic. It's just synthetic for what it's trying to do. So we can either support the body and understand. I think a large part of it too is there's been a lot of wisdom that we've lost over the years from generations, like what our great grandmothers would have known about our bodies. We don't have that wisdom anymore because it's been lost thinking that, I mean, if you think of, I'm trying to think of what it's called, Oxycontin with Purdue Pharma. They
Hmm.
had that big pain, I want to say advertisement, but that's not it. You know what I mean, though, where they pushed pain, and that was their big thing into having people take their pharmaceutical medication because people shouldn't have pain. It's not that we should have pain, but we shouldn't be muting the signals that our body is showing us,
Hmm.
and our body is going to communicate with us. And if we have lost the wisdom that our body has through, intuition, that's how our body's communicating, is through intuition and through symptoms. And if we are muting that, then we are, disassociating ourselves from our body, and that's why we don't know what our body's communicating anymore.
Hmm.
It's because we've become so disconnected from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes a lot of sense, even in regards to emotions that get stored in the body. And if you're just really pushing yourself and just separating yourself from everything, including the symptoms, and it's just information. At its basic, like no positive, negative, it's just information. And it's just a
Yeah.
matter of what do you want to do with that? I can go back to the iron dysregulation. Is there a way? I know there's a big, as far as regulation of it, I know copper is a big thing when it comes to energy and regulating iron. Are you able to expand more on that?
Yeah, so I like to picture it like a bus. So the bus is called ceruloplasmin, and color is important when we're talking about how our bodies function. And we all know that intuitively, we just don't think about it. So if you picture when you were, shown the effects of smoking and somebody was trying to show you the negative effects, there's always, on one hand, there is somebody who was smoked and it's their lungs. And then on the other side, there's always a picture of a set of lungs with somebody who didn't smoke. When we're looking at the lungs, we can't taste it, we can't smell it, we can't touch it, but we can see it. And we can
Mhm.
see that the color is not the color that our lungs are supposed to be. So we all intuitively know that the color of our organs is very important. We just don't think of it like that. So cerulo means baby blue, and it is a conveyor belt that moves copper to the mitochondria. So your mitochondria are called purple bacteria. I hope I'm not losing any of the listeners. I'm trying to break this down. So we all know that in order to make purple, we need red and blue. So that means that's why red light therapy is so beneficial. It's because it's activating the ceruloplasmin when it hits the mitochondria. And that's what's, again, the color has a role. So we can't have color without copper. So you have this baby blue bus. There are 7 doors for iron to get on. So say, for example, we have a lineup of people, the people are iron. Say there's 20 or 30 people waiting to get on this bus. We first need somebody to come around and unlock the doors. So that person is vitamin A in the form of retinol, which is
Mhm.
different than beta-carotene. So we want an animal source of vitamin A. And then we need somebody to man the doors. That person is copper. Copper is the doorman. So there's 2 really important parts, or I guess 3. One, we need a bus. The second is we need retinol to be present. And the third is we need copper to be present. If we don't have those, then that lineup of iron, instead of there being 20 to 30, say now we have 100. And now that's where we're going to end up with the issues of iron being in the organs and being trapped.
Mhm.
So with that being said, there's 7 doors to let iron on and there's one to let it off. So if we don't have copper that stays on that bus, or we don't have retinol that stays on that bus, then iron can't get off of the bus and get back into the bloodstream. So that process is how iron moves. So a lot of the time we're thinking about things again as that high or low.
Mhm.
If iron isn't in the blood, then it means that it's not in us, but that's not true because it's in the organs. Same thing as a vitamin D deficiency. It's actually a magnesium deficiency. So if we don't have enough magnesium, then that's where we're going to run into a low vitamin D. So it's not that we're low in these nutrients, it's that things aren't just not balanced from a mineral perspective.
And it's so common when people have iron deficiency. I mean, I was on iron pills in the past, and it's always those like little, I think they're green, but it's you end up constipated, and your
Yeah.
iron doesn't really get that much better in your blood. And it's like, it's so interesting how you talk about if it's not moving out of the tissues, it just like builds up there.
Yeah.
So what in terms of support for the system? Like, how can people help their bodies? Get rid of the little iron pills. What can they
Yeah.
do instead?
So there would be a few key things, and I honestly I can't stress getting rid of the iron supplements the most
Mhm.
because or iron infusions. It honestly makes me sick thinking of the women who are pregnant and getting iron infusions or taking iron supplements. If anybody wants to read something, they should, and they're open to not being scared, they should read Jim Moon, Iron the Most Toxic Metal. That'll really open your eyes to the toxicity that iron really is. But if you're looking to getting iron moving and you really have to stop with consuming more iron. We don't need more of it. So that is affecting iron's movement. Vitamin D supplements, we don't need vitamin D supplements. We need it naturally occurring. I think a large part of this, what it comes down to is like, how have we evolved? We have evolved with a variety of nutrients. There was a study that I was just reading because I'm going to do a post on folate coming up. And, everyone's concerned about folate during pregnancy and not having enough. And the study looked at giving women folate, and they were looking at a hormone in the blood to see if that hormone was reduced or not, or that protein, sorry. If that protein is present, folate's role is to reduce it. And so it's considered a success if the folate does reduce it, and that's what we think leads to, or that is what leads to the birth defects. So anyway, the study looked at it was 17% reduction with just folic acid. But then when they added more nutrients to it, it went all the way up to 77% that it reduced this protein by. So it's not that we just need one nutrient, it's that when these nutrients occur naturally together, it has a
Mhm.
huge harmonious effect on the body. So when we're thinking of, well, I'm just going to take some vitamin D because I don't actually get enough of it, well, you could take cod liver oil. Cod liver oil has a bunch of nutrients in it. It has vitamin A and vitamin D occurring naturally together.
Mhm.
And that is actually what we wanted in. When we are taking like things that are heavily marketed, that are, trying to think of like a nice way to say it, I think that the creators of them have good intentions, but they're still making a supplement that is taken out of the context of what is like a whole natural form
Mhm.
of something. So like when there are these omega blends, that are marketed to children that have all of these crazy flavors for kids to take.
Mhm.
A lot of people think that their kids won't take them, but I feel like I surprise everyone. My 4-year-old and my 1-year-old both gobble down cod liver oil like it's nobody's business. My 4-year-old isn't super keen on it, but he gets to take elderberry syrup afterwards. So as long as I make that deal with him, then he's going to take it. So if we're looking to increase iron's movement, we need to stop with the synthetic things and add in as much really whole food substances that we can. The
Mhm.
ones that I always like to start off with are like an adrenal cocktail. I love cod liver oil and I love beef liver. But when you're getting those, it's important to know where you're sourcing it from because
Mhm.
just because they say that doesn't mean that it's actually good for you. And that can be a really great start. Or adrenal cocktails are difficult to get in Canada. I'm actually making one right now. So that will be out sometime soon because I don't like having to bring in everything from the United States. I feel like
Mhm.
Canadians should have an adrenal cocktail here.
That would be handy. We know the problems of getting things across the border sometimes. It can be quite
That's
frustrating in that way.
Yep.
Just going back to not necessarily too high iron, even though that's what everyone thinks is a problem, or it's too low. What are some of the most common symptoms that women over 40 might experience with that?
I would say everything. I
At least a
really
few so
believe
people can
everything,
identify.
but hair loss, fatigue, cramping around their menstrual cycle, inability to lose weight, like
Mhm.
struggles with weight loss, that's a huge one. Blood sugar imbalance, gray hairs. Again, think we need copper for color, so gray
Mhm.
hairs is a sign. I'm trying to think of some other really common ones. I would say those are like pretty much the foundational ones from the women that I've worked with. There's a few kind of other ones, but like if you have struggled with PCOS or endometriosis throughout your life, that means that you have dysregulated iron because
Mhm.
that's iron that's in the womb space. So, as you continue, the reason that we age is because we accumulate iron.
Yeah.
So, if we are looking to, reverse aging, we all know the importance of, you look at expensive skincare, it's going to have retinol in it.
Hmm.
or vitamin C is another good one. Like these are things that companies know are important. They just
Mhm.
don't, they might not understand that it's iron's movement that they're actually helping with. So, keeping our skin looking youthful, that's a huge part in it too, because in order to produce collagen, we need vitamin C.
Yeah. And like, what depletes those things?
So we are up in we are up in a big battle for our minerals. So there was a study that was done from 1941 to 1991, and they looked at the mineral status in the soil. And because, I mean, logically speaking, if it's not in the soil, it's not getting in our foods, and we're not
Hmm.
getting the same level of it. There was a difference in those years of 76% of copper loss that had happened just in vegetables alone. So that is a huge number. Like if we think of fevers, for example, we know the impact that a small percentage can have on how our bodies function.
Hmm.
Now, if you're thinking over a 50-year period where we've lost 3/4 of the minerals that we would have been, or of copper that we would have been consuming from that vegetable, that has a huge toll on our body.
Mhm.
Along with that, in 1941, ironically, of all years, they began fortifying our foods with iron. So we began consuming more of it. And another reason why I know that iron supplements don't work is because of that. So it was the UK, the US, and Canada that all began to fortify their foods with iron in 1941. Then in the 1970s, as if it was some kind of like cruel April Fool's joke, they went on April 1st and said, listen, anemia still exists. So in order to combat anemia, we have been fortifying our foods with iron. We actually need to do it 3 times harder because it hasn't worked yet.
Wow.
Now, you can tell me any time that a positive outcome has happened from something not working and then deciding to do it 3 times as hard, let me know because it doesn't make any sense to me. But that was what they proposed.
Yeah.
They didn't get it at 3 times the amount. They increased it by 50%, but now we don't know how much our foods are actually fortified with iron with. So we have this bolus of iron that we are exposed to. Fourth generation antibiotics have a huge detriment on our copper status. Even glyphosate. Glyphosate is huge. It chelates copper. So there was a study that was done in France. They looked at, this was when glyphosate was illegal there. They wanted to see what the residents were exposed to for glyphosate, and they were shocked because it's illegal, and 99% of them were exposed, they had glyphosate in their urine.
Yeah.
So glyphosate is around us, even if it's not being used directly beside you. It's in our air, it's in our water, it's all around us. And that has a huge toll on our copper status. It affects other minerals too, but it does affect copper. So we're in this battle where, we are being exposed more and more to iron and less to other nutrients that we need. And that is why, like even people who haven't had iron supplements or things like that, well, even for example, the time frame that you're born in, because when we are born, there is a huge download of copper that happens within the last 6 weeks. And so if you are born premature, then you miss out on
Mhm.
that copper download.
Hmm.
So one of the clients that I'm actually working with, it's a he. I've worked with a handful of men have come to me for help, and he doesn't have enough copper, but he wasn't born into this world with enough copper. So, his
Yeah.
journey to health and wellness really is going to be a long one because he's going to be correcting about 50 years of mineral imbalance.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So, what can people do for the copper problem? Because you don't want to take things in isolation, right?
No, no, you don't. So there are a few ways to go about it. Like I said, I like to stick to three like really basic that I think are really foundational, and then you can kind of go from there.
Hmm.
The adrenal cocktail is great because it's whole, as long as it's whole food vitamin C. So a lot of the questions that I get are like, well, this vitamin C says ascorbic acid, is that good? No, ascorbic acid blows up the ceruloplasmin. Instead of the ceruloplasmin having a life of 6 days, it lasts 6 hours. So we don't want ascorbic acid. We want whole food vitamin C. And as long as it has a name that you can pronounce and it looks normal, then that's a good one. But they're hard to find. They are hard to
Hmm.
find with whole food vitamin C. So an adrenal cocktail is sodium, potassium, and whole food vitamin C. Sodium and potassium are really important, especially when we're talking about women who are struggling with constipation, because we need sodium and potassium to help move water through the body. Same thing as magnesium. Magnesium is needed for our muscles to relax and contract. And so if we don't have enough salt, we don't have enough potassium, and we don't have enough magnesium there, you're not going to get the water flowing properly, and you're not going to get your muscles relaxing and contracting. So an adrenal cocktail, for sure, you can make that super easy on your own. The best one that I found, and I'll say this since mine's not out there, but is Jigsaw. Jigsaw is really great. And then a magnesium supplement for sure. I love magnesium biglycinate, but it doesn't even have to be like a capsule that you consume. You can get a tallow whipped butter that has magnesium flakes added in it. You can apply it topically or magnesium spray. So that's also really helpful too. And then beef liver or an organ blend, I find really helpful because while we know that iron gets stored in the liver, it also gets stored in other organs too. So an organ blend is going to be really helpful because it's going to help support those organs. So in northern Canada, the indigenous people, when they first killed an animal, the first thing that they used to do would be to eat the eyes of that animal. And while that sounds probably not super appetizing to the most of us now, they did that because it supported their eyes. So
Mhm.
when we eat the organs of other animals, it supports our organs. And that is the wisdom of that's been passed down. So if we get an organ blend, then it's not going to be as high in copper because beef liver is one of the highest forms in copper, but we're going to get a blend of other nutrients, and that's really important. So that or cod liver oil, like I like those four. I mean, aside from magnesium, magnesium is just lost at an exponential rate. So we have to have some kind of supplement for it. But even when we're consuming that, we can consume them with other whole food supplements so that the other nutrients are there. And it's not just the vitamin A that we're taking. It's not just the vitamin D that comes from these natural sources. It's the blend of everything together that our bodies have actually evolved being able to absorb and use properly.
Mhm. It's good you highlighted the magnesium because whether people want to admit it or not, everyone's under stress and depleting all their minerals. For us, well, I guess I don't know where you are in Canada offhand.
I'm in Fort McMurray.
Okay, so we're kind of a little far. We're more in Ontario near Toronto. We have a local farm that we go to and get nose to tail ground beef, which is basically kind of covering that as best as possible, grass fed, which is another great option. So if anyone's listening and they want to figure out what kind of options they have, if you can look for a local farmer who does that, that can be a great option.
Absolutely. Yeah. I get actually one way that I sneak in beef liver is I get it from a farm and then I put it in a meat grinder. I grind it down into a paste.
Hmm.
And then I have like I originally bought them to make dog treats out of. They're just little tiny dog bones. But I put the liver paste in that and then I freeze it. And then whenever I make ground beef or ground pork, I take a few cubes of that, throw it in, and then there's liver in it and nobody knows.
Nobody needs to know. Very nice.
That's perfect. So what was this is kind of an aside question, just thinking of the ascorbic acid and like so a lot of people took a ton of that. And when it comes to getting vitamin C, especially through COVID, right? There was so much fear about immune system and the giant Costco bottles of vitamin C were flying off the shelves. People are taking tons of that. Does it have a negative impact if you're taking too much of that or too consistently?
Yeah. So ascorbic acid in comparison to whole food vitamin C, a lot of people will say they're the same, but they look the same on the outside. It would be kind of like if I had a twin also named Samantha, and I would be like, yeah, no, she's identical to me. But you would know that inside we are not actually identical. There are differences, whether we are going to like different things or whatnot.
Mhm.
There's going to be something that's a little bit different. It's not going to be 100% the same. And so the difference is with it being synthetic, ascorbic acid misses an enzyme at its core, and that enzyme is called tyrosinase.
Mhm.
Tyrosinase is very, very important, it has a bunch of different functions, but it's kind of like if you went to a car dealership and you were looking at cars and there were two cars identical sitting side by side. You went and looked at the one that was for ascorbic acid, and the interior and the engine is missing of that car.
Hmm.
The engine can't go. So what ascorbic acid does is it absorbs iron into the tissues and helps prevent it from moving. So it's
Wow.
not our friend, and that's part of the issue for it. Tyrosinase is just it's really central in making sure that whole food vitamin C functions properly. And it's kind of like, again, where we think we're smarter, we're cherry picking these
Mhm.
different things that we think are the same, but it's not completely identical, and that's the issue.
Always looking for kind of the cheapest option too, which is it doesn't seem like a priority, right? Like
Hmm.
I worked at a supplement store for quite some time and yeah, I was like, can I get a gummy version of that? And we need to be looking for sourcing, as you mentioned, especially for liver or for whatever. But it's important to make sure you know what you're putting into your body. Just because it says Lexus on the outside, if there's no engine, it's not going to be very good for you, right?
Mhm.
No, and that's the issue. I have I honestly like McDonald's more than I like a lot of the supplement companies, because at least when people go to McDonald's, they know that they're not getting whole food.
Yep.
But when people are
Yeah.
purchasing these supplements, they think that they're doing something good. They are taking these prenatals thinking that they are helping their bodies. They're taking all of this folic acid or folate, whatever one they decide on, thinking that it's the solution, but it's not actually what the body is needing. And so that is the issue that I have with all these supplements, is there's a whole bunch of them that are marketed as if they are clean, and they aren't. And people just think that they're doing something good and they're not.
Mhm. So true. There's just so many different names for things as well. You really have to be your best advocate and research what's in all the items that you're purchasing. Could you
Mhm.
share some resources or tools? I know you have some items on your website, Wellness and Womb. Could you just share any of those that you think the women might benefit from having?
Yeah, so I have one on Iron's movement. That one's really key. I think that that one's really like foundational to understand how iron moves. So that one's really important. I have another one on supplements. So, like, if you're looking for ones to get started with, when in doubt, just know that 99% of the supplements on the market are junk. So, just if you're wondering if that one's a good one, probably not. But I do have a list of some ones that I do really like.
Mhm.
And I have a bunch of different ones like PCOS and fertility. And then I have another one on balancing energy. And the next one that I'm working on is a free adrenal cocktail one. So that can be really helpful. Like my TikTok is full of videos on how iron moves, and so is my Instagram. Those are the probably the two biggest ones where I'll talk about different things.
Perfect. And we
Okay.
can note all that in the show notes for everybody so they can find you.
Yeah, make sure you send us when your new adrenal cocktail is available, and we'll
Mhm.
put that in the show notes as well. Because it's so good to have
Absolutely.
resources for people
Mhm.
that aren't crap, aren't garbage, right? And that, yeah, I've been following you for a while, and it's like, oh, this is really interesting. Do you have what's one final piece of advice that you would like to share with our listeners that you think is really important?
I think that if you're struggling with something and you're not sure if iron's movement is involved, then it probably is. So whether it's autoimmune, whether it's your cycle, whether it's your brain fog, your migraines, your fatigue, all of those different things all come back to iron's movement. So iron can be trapped in different parts of the body, not just the liver, and that is a huge part of it, whether it's insulin imbalance or, insulin resistance, all of these different things. Our bodies can't make minerals, but they can make hormones. So if we have any kind of hormonal imbalance, then our body is trying to compensate for a lack of balanced minerals to get our bodies back to balance. So if you feel like you are just not quite where you need to be, then I highly recommend looking into how iron moves as a really great way of getting started.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Samantha. And I hope that everyone got a ton of value from this. Make sure you check out the show notes because we'll put all of Samantha's information in there and check out her TikTok. I've been watching you for quite a while and I find it fascinating, the stuff that you share. And I love how you break it down to make it really easy to understand for people because it is a complicated topic.
Mhm.
And so it's important to have someone who makes it so it's something that you can understand. So, again, thank you for joining us today.